Fiancé prioritized his business partner over me for a higher commission, and now I'm reconsidering our engagement amidst betrayal and sabotage. My fiancé Nick and I have been together 3 years, engaged 1. I'm a grad student who's pretty broke and works odd jobs to pay for school and life. He's a mid-level executive pulling in 6 figures who works from home and has a ton of downtime and freedom. Recently, he created an app that allows him to produce these digital goods he can sell online. I can't provide more detail. He completely controls production and distribution of his goods, and the only cost is essentially maintaining the software. The stuff practically runs itself now at zero cost to him. There is huge demand for these goods in this small community online, and a few months ago Nick found someone there he could trust, Joe. Joe sells the goods for Nick, who doesn't like doing it, and takes 50% commission. The money is good enough that you could leave your day job doing it, although both haven't. Ever since he built the app, Nick has been trying to get me to sell these goods for him as well. He likes when I work from home so I can share his lifestyle with him, plus the money is better than a regular job. After a while, I agreed and started to sell. Initially, Nick asked for 10% of what I made, which was cool. Then I noticed he started getting unhappy with how I was selling, but unreasonably so. He'd start an argument if I gave a customer a $2 discount for a $70 order. Apparently Joe was unhappy that I was selling on his turf and was bitching at Nick about it, and Nick was taking it out on me in turn. Keep in mind there are more than enough goods and customers for Nick to hire 5 to 6 more sellers on top of me and Joe. The arguments continue, selling is becoming unbearable for me, and Joe's complaints are just unreasonable. But Nick keeps saying that I'm the one who has to accommodate Joe and fix things. Finally, I tell Nick that I feel like he prioritizes Joe over me, and he replied, well yes, I get 50% of what he makes, so he's a more important seller than you. I have to prioritize him. That hurt my feelings, and of course I wanted the arguments to end, so I offered to give 50% of everything I sold to Nick as well so that I could be treated equally as a salesperson. He agreed. Of course, Joe still wasn't happy. His complaints continued that I was stealing his customers and undercutting him. I wasn't. I came up with a fair solution of matching our prices, to which he agreed, but then he actively started undermining me as a seller. He would tell me he was selling something at $50, I'd follow suit, then I'd find out he was selling them at $20, that kind of shit. Anyway, I told Nick about this and he essentially told me the same thing as before. Joe was a priority and he was tired of dealing with our drama. He also said that Joe was an established member of the community, he had a large footprint as a seller who's been doing it years before me, and he was irreplaceable. Joe finally came clean and told Nick that he was unhappy that I was selling it all. He doesn't want to take money out of his mouth and put into hers, and therefore he doesn't want to have any sort of sales system with me, even though it was his complaints that led to that. Nick thought his feelings were reasonable, and started telling me that he didn't have to be my employer, and that he owned the whole thing and could shut it down any time. He said he wanted both Joe and me to be happy, and that I should work with him on finding a solution, ignoring that Joe said he wants me out and was obviously going to sabotage any solution again. I was so disgusted and tired of the whole thing that I quit selling yesterday. Joe is happy, Nick is happy that he doesn't have to deal with the drama anymore. But I'm resentful towards Nick. I don't know if I'm in the wrong, but it's making me rethink our wedding. Update 1. Keeping all your advice in mind, I sat down with Nick last night to have a talk about the venture and Joe. At first, he was defensive. He accused me of entering the business and demanding to change the system Joe and I created. He said I'd been acting like an entitled girlfriend asking for him and Joe to cater to my whims. I was so baffled by this version of events that I made him discuss each event chronologically. He tried to put the blame on me, but I wasn't having any of it. Eventually he admitted that everything was fine with me until Joe started asking for changes. That is the only time I started coming up with proposed changes to the system, because neither he nor Joe were coming up with any but kept telling me something needed to change. Then he finally explained why he'd been acting the way he has. So it turns out that Nick doesn't view Joe as an employee the way I was, but viewed him as an equal business partner who was there with him from the beginning and has equal say in the business. That was why he was irreplaceable. He apparently told Joe that I would only be selling temporarily, which is not what he told me. Naturally, Joe started getting miffed when it turned out I was there to stay, especially when I started selling a blizzard of goods, in Nick's words. He hadn't expected me to be so good at selling. Nick apologized, said he handled the whole affair very poorly, and said that I wasn't to blame after all. I accepted his apology, but I told him that none of it had been a reason to treat me badly and that it showed that I was still not a priority. I told him that I haven't been a priority since the beginning of our relationship and that marriage was not on the table anymore because I really need to be a team with my husband. He went quiet and then started talking about how he feels like he has to cater to me all the time, keep me entertained, and that my life revolves around him. I was really surprised by this because I lead a normal life, school, work, etc., and detected a hint of contempt because I'm not entirely consumed by work like he is. After a bit of prodding, it turns out that Nick is one of those people who prefer living by themselves, having 30 hours coding marathons alone than passing out for 15. Any kind of relationship where you see each other more than 3x a week is too much work for him, essentially. That isn't conducive to any relationship I want to have, and that hint of contempt really sealed the deal for me. He thinks I'm too high maintenance, in attention and effort, and I think he's not meeting my minimum requirement for a boyfriend, let alone a fiancé. We express these things to one another. I did mention the horseshit distribution of labor, too. At the end of the discussion, I told him the wedding was on indefinite hold and that we would be living separately from now on. He seemed bummed out but accepted it. I think he really feels that our relationship can work that way. He seemed pretty damn chipper this morning. I know I need to leave him immediately. The problem is that we have a 2-month-long international trip coming up in a week that I cannot cancel, so I want to make that as painless as possible. That trip has been 10 years in the making and entails family members I haven't seen in a long time. After that, I'll move out and let him know it's over. This is actually a very involved trip into a couple of continents. We have a shared apartment in Europe that we were planning on emptying and ending the lease on. We're both needed for that. The second leg of the trip is to my native country and he's not needed for that. However, he's already paid thousands of dollars in non-refundable airfare for it and has been excited for months about it, so I'm not about to yank that out from under him. Our relationship may be ending, but I don't hate him. Honestly, he knows what me moving out means. He's a smart guy. I've always made clear that living together and getting married is important to me, so he knows. He's also someone who avoids unpleasant conversations like the plague, so it won't be awkward. This trip is making the best of things, I suppose. Update 2. So for a year after the trip we did fairly okay. Soon after, we went to visit Joe in person in his home state. Once there, we met his wife and we saw that his family life was highly unstable, drug-addicted wife, marriage falling apart while we were there. Joe was clearly an alcoholic spiraling. This seemed to open Nick's eyes and he became a much more respectful partner to me. He started treating me better and being more present, but he was still useless at home chores. It also helped that his app got shut down and his business ended. No more selling. At that point I graduated from school and started working. Nick developed a crippling video game and alcohol addiction. For 3 years he did basically nothing else. It was horrible. He gained 100+ pounds, started ignoring me completely, and refused any help I offered. He became verbally abusive and just plain mean. I really tried to salvage things for a couple years but it was unworkable. I called off our wedding 6 months before it happened in 2019, after he completely abandoned me when I was having a medical procedure done. Today, I moved to a different state, have worked at the same company for 6 years making decent money, and live in my own apartment downtown of a major city. I travel a lot and live a very comfortable life. The men I've dated since Nick have been better in every way. They cook, clean, are attentive, plan dates. I don't think I'll ever marry though after this experience. Nick and I are vaguely still friends. It's hard to cut off completely after nearly 10 years together. We rarely see each other. He now has a very dependent girlfriend that he has to do everything for. He has apologized to me several times and acknowledged how shitty and exploitative he was during our relationship. Update 3. I honestly thought I'd put this to bed, but the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Last January I got a fat $1,099K in the mail from a processor I haven't touched since grad school. It said I'd earned just over $38,000 last year selling under an alias I haven't used in forever. That was my first red flag. Second one, a handful of chargeback letters from banks I don't bank with, addressed to my old apartment and forwarded to me because I set up mail forwarding like a paranoid squirrel. I don't sell anything online. I haven't in years. I don't even keep Venmo notifications on. I called the processor assuming it was a clerical error. It wasn't. The account had my old school email as the login, my legal name on the KYC, and a shipping address I recognized as Nick's old condo. They stonewalled me without a police report, because, yes, someone had diligently uploaded a photo of my ID to pass verification. I sat there on hold staring at a PDF of my own face wondering if I was losing my mind or if I was finally cashing the bill for a mess I walked away from years ago. I filed the report, then texted Nick. "Did you open an account in my name?" He called me immediately, unusually sober for a weekday morning. He denied it. Fast, he said he hadn't touched any of that stuff since everything shut down. He suggested Joe. I told him I'd love to ask Joe, but Joe's wife had put a GoFundMe up for funeral costs last spring, which I had donated to, so maybe not him. That shut him up. He asked for the last 4 digits of the account number. He said he'd look into it like a customer service bot. Then he asked, too casually, if the login email was the old one he set up for me to keep business separate. I said yes. He went quiet, then admitted his girlfriend uses his desktop sometimes and he hadn't wiped anything. My stomach dropped. His girlfriend, by the way, had been a nonentity for me until this point. I'd met her once, young, kind of deer in headlights energy, carries tote bags overflowing with half-finished crafts. She'd looked at me like I was the ghost of bad choices past and I'd kept it polite and quick. 2 days later she called me from a number I didn't know. She was crying before I said hello. The story tumbled out. She'd been helping Nick organize his receipts to try to get his taxes under control and found a folder labeled with my name on his desktop. It had scans of my ID, my old alias, old pricing sheets, and a password manager with a dumb little hint that only I and Nick would get. She said she logged in out of curiosity, and because Nick had told her I left them holding the bag and he'd had to keep the thing afloat, she sold under my alias for a couple months to test it and then for the rest of the year because she liked seeing money land. She told me she always intended to tell me as soon as she had a handle on it. Apparently the handle looked like me getting taxed on their rent. I kept it together as much as I could. I asked her if Nick knew. She said he told her it was fine, that I didn't care about that stuff, that I'd benefit from the write-offs anyway. That last line was so tone-deaf it made me laugh. I asked her if she still had access to the account. She did. I told her to change the payout to her name if she wanted to keep selling and to remove my documents or I'd escalate. She said she was sorry, she was trying to help and keep him focused. It was like listening to a tape of myself at 24, and it made my skin crawl. I called my accountant, who I keep because I'm anxious and like professionals, and we put together an identity theft packet. I sent the police report, the letters, screenshots of the folder she described, and the obituary link for Joe in case anyone tried to pin it on him. The processor finally unlocked enough information to confirm that recent logins came from Nick's IP. That, plus his girlfriend's statement, was enough for their fraud team to reissue the $1,099K to her and kick my info off. It should have felt like a win, but I just sat there staring at my bookshelf wanting to scrub the inside of my head with bleach. Nick texted me that night like nothing had happened. Everything fixed? I told him he needed to delete everything with my name on it. He said he'd archive it. I told him to delete it or I'd file a civil suit. He used to be so smooth and suddenly he was clumsy. He sent me a picture of an empty folder as if I was an idiot, and then an apology that sounded like a college student caught plagiarizing a paper. He said he never meant to hurt me, that he assumed I'd say yes if he asked because I always did before. He said he was drowning and didn't know how to earn without that machine humming in the background. He said she was just trying to help and he didn't catch it in time. I reminded him that it took a calendar year and a tax form. He pivoted to telling me how much he hated himself. I told him that wasn't my problem to fix anymore. I thought that was the end of it, but weirdly that set off a cascade I didn't expect. A week later I was at a work dinner and a guy at the table asked where I'd moved from. I said the city. He said, "Oh, I used to buy from someone there," and his face went bright red when he realized how that sounded. I laughed and told him I used to sell. People do what they do. He apologized and then blurted, "There was this seller who always seemed to cut their prices by half an hour after you posted." It was wild. Kind of a legend. It felt like the room tilted. I asked him what alias. He named mine and Joe's. He told me everyone knew Joe would wait me out and drop the price to make me look greedy. He said he hadn't felt bad then because it was just business, but sitting next to a human being and saying it out loud made him realize what a creep move it was. It was oddly comforting to hear it from a stranger. It was like peeling scar tissue and realizing there was still skin underneath. I left that dinner lighter than I had any right to. Then, because apparently I hadn't had enough closure for one quarter, Joe's wife messaged me on Facebook. I hadn't seen it because it went to that requests folder where brunch invites from high school lab partners go to die. She had sent it months ago, the week after the funeral. She said Joe had tried to apologize before the end. He told her he'd set up dummy accounts to watch my prices and told the regulars that I was unstable so they wouldn't buy from me even when my price was better. He'd saved old chats where Nick told him to just wait her out, she's soft. He'd printed them and stuffed them in a file labeled "If I Die and People Still Hate Me." This woman had just lost her husband and still felt compelled to mail me a manila envelope with a sticky note that said, "I think he knew he ruined you too." I sat on my couch with this artifact of my 20s in my lap and finally let myself feel angry all the way through. I sent copies of the relevant parts to Nick because I wanted him to see himself in black and white, not just the soft focus version where he's the guy who made mistakes. He didn't respond for a day, and then he called me from outside a meeting like a kid caught smoking behind a gym. He said he didn't remember writing those things, but he didn't doubt it. He said he'd started going to meetings. He said the girlfriend had moved out that week. He said he was scared of being alone because when he's alone he sees what he did. He asked me if I hated him. I told him I don't have the energy to hate him. I'm finally using that energy for myself. If life were a neat arc, that would be the cathartic last scene. Instead, a month after all this, he applied for a dev contract at my company under a one-man LLC. He put me as a reference without asking. It hit my queue because I review third-party vendors. I sat there with his application on my screen like a glitch in the simulation. I recused myself and flagged the conflict, then emailed him to remove my name from anything with his. He called me not to apologize, but to tell me that I was letting personal history cost him a professional opportunity. I told him my responsibility was to my employer and myself, and he lost any claim on my goodwill when he let his life leak onto mine in the form of a tax bill. He tried one more angle. We used to be a team. I told him teams don't put each other on the cap table without consent and hang them out to dry. He hung up. It sounds bleak, but it hasn't been. Getting dragged into the old mess shoved me into making choices I'd been dodging because things were comfortable. I sold the ring to pay the lawyer and took my mom to see her sister for the first time in 15 years. I started saying yes to invitations that didn't make sense on paper. I let a coworker set me up with her friend who lives across town and thinks cooking dinner is foreplay and takes my car to get serviced without making a speech about it. I still don't know if marriage is in the cards, but I don't flinch when someone uses the word around me anymore. I'm not haunted by a wedding that didn't happen. Last week I got a final letter from the processor closing the fraud case and confirming they'd issued amended tax forms. The envelope sat on my counter for an hour because I didn't want to give this era one more second of my day. When I opened it, the letter was 3 lines long. I put it with the rest of my files and finally, mercifully, put the box away. Nick texted yesterday a photo of his chipped coffee mug next to a white chip with the number 90 on it. He didn't write anything else. I don't know what sobriety looks like on him, and I'm not auditioning to find out. I told him congratulations and put my phone in a drawer. I made dinner for someone who actually shows up at my door when he says he will, and when I went to sleep my brain didn't try to inventory anyone else's chaos. That's the part of this I wish I could mail back to my younger self in a manila envelope. You are allowed to keep what's yours and let the rest burn without feeling like you lit the match. Update 4. The universe must have subscribed to my calendar because it waited until the day I finally put the box of old paperwork on the top closet shelf to knock again. My building emailed that I had a certified letter and a visitor with an envelope. I went downstairs in yesterday's mascara and a hoodie that says the name of my company in small font, and there was a man in sensible shoes and a lanyard asking if we could chat somewhere private. He introduced himself like a dentist, gentle voice, very careful with my name, and slid a card across the table in the empty conference room off the lobby. State AG's office. Digital crimes. He told me I wasn't in trouble. He said it 3 times. He said that up front because it is apparently a line they have to say to women who have had their identities used by men that love them. He asked me about last year's 1099K, then about the processor, then about Nick. I kept my answers boring and factual because no part of me wanted to narrate a decade to a stranger over the smell of industrial carpet cleaner. He had a stack of printouts. A map of IP addresses like chicken pox around an address I could draw from memory. A list of account names I hadn't seen in years lined up with dollar amounts that meant rent and groceries at one point and now just looked like the world's pettiest heist. Other names too, ones that weren't mine. That was when the room went cold. He told me they'd flagged a pattern of borrowed KYC across a couple of processors and a couple years, same network, same devices. He said my report kicked their case into something that needed a file and a metal shelf. I called my lawyer from the sidewalk because adult me keeps people like that on speed dial now. We scheduled a time and walked through what I'd actually seen and what I could hand over. The envelope Joe's wife had mailed me was still out because I hadn't decided where to put a paper that heavy with ghosts. There were printed chats in there with my name and a version of Nick who used phrases like she's soft, wait her out, living a little too comfortably on clean white paper. I sat at my kitchen table and scanned every page, my new guy quietly washing dishes at the sink without making it a performance. When I emailed them to the investigator, he emailed back almost immediately with a thanks that felt like a sigh traveling over fiber. I thought that would be the bureaucratic part, a baton pass, the thing that lives in someone else's hands. Then Nick texted from a number that wasn't saved, punctuation and capitalization sober. I'm making amends. I'd like to pay you back for the legal fees and the taxes. That's step 9 language, and for what it's worth, I'm glad he's somewhere that teaches responsibility instead of apologies like wet paper towels. I told him if he wanted to make anything right, he could send any future communication through my lawyer and delete anything with my name on it like I'd asked the first 3 times. He said, "Can I at least bring you your folder?" And I thought that was his way of underlining that he still had pieces of me he could hand over. 2 mornings later the doorman called me before I'd had coffee. "He's here," he said, and my stomach made that deadlift drop feeling. "Don't come up," I said. "Don't take it." I put on actual pants and went downstairs anyway because curiosity's still in me like a bad tattoo. He was smaller than the last time I'd seen him, lighter in the way that happens when you stop drinking and the inflammation goes down and your bones come back and you suddenly look like your high school pictures from certain angles if you squint. He didn't try to hug me. He had one of those collapsible file boxes you buy at office supply stores when your life is being audited. He set it on a table and stepped back like it might explode. "It's all your stuff," he said. "Scans, the passwords, the old logs, the backups." I deleted my copies. I told him I'd have someone check. He flinched and said, "I know." He had a chip in his hand again, this one pocket worn, and he turned it over without looking at it like worry. Beads. I took the box upstairs and put it in the bathtub because that felt like the safest place for a thing that had already set parts of my life on fire. My boyfriend, let's call him Evan because that's his name and he's not a plot point, he's a person, suggested we buy the $200 laptop off a local marketplace and use that to look through the drive so I didn't contaminate anything else. Practical in a way that made me feel 16 and grateful. We drove across town and bought something with a cracked corner from a guy who called us boss. Back home, we put the thumb drive in and waited for the cheap fan to sound like a hair dryer. There were folders named like a nesting doll: archive, old_archive, use_this_1, newest. There were scans of my face and my address in 3 fonts. There were spreadsheets, of course, because this was Nick. He had kept everything down to notes like "don't sell to M, chargeback happy," which filled me with a mean satisfaction I don't think I'll apologize for. There was a document that listed who knows what, and my stomach cold again when I saw strangers' names and little notes next to them. Whatever he had done with me, he'd done with at least 2 other women from that era, one of them an ex of Joe's who I remembered from a photo of a backyard barbecue that had looked like a hostage situation even when I didn't have the vocabulary for it. I didn't go detective. I zipped the whole thing and sent it to my lawyer with a subject line that just said "from Nick." The AG's office picked it up like a waiter's hand you don't need to wave for because you're obviously done with your plate. The investigator called to ask if I'd be willing to make a statement on the record and sign the thing that says you're not lying. I told him yes because younger me keeps tapping me on the shoulder asking if we're going to make the same mistake twice. Nick kept texting in his newly quiet voice. I know you don't want to hear it, but I'm trying to be better. He said his sponsor told him not to make amends if it harmed me. He asked if this was harming me. The honesty of that knocked something loose because the answer was yes and no. Yes in the way that having your name typed on a form with words like fraud and scheme next to it eats a layer of your brain you don't grow back. No in the way that handling it like an adult in daylight with witnesses built something underneath that could hold weight. I told him the kindest thing he could do was be boring and predictable. He said he didn't know if he could be boring. I said then be sober. Work found out in the way work finds out when something kicks over into public record. Compliance looped me in on a call without saying my name until the end, bless them, and asked if I was comfortable being walled off from any vendor reviews remotely touching whatever entity Nick was operating under. I was, and I am. It felt like getting to say no, thank you and having a room full of adults nod instead of making me explain why no is a full sentence. In the middle of all this, because life doesn't care about neat narrative arcs, Evan asked me if I wanted to come to his sister's for dinner. The last time a man said my family to me, it meant being used like a prop. This time it meant a tiny backyard with wind chimes and a lab that thinks I'm furniture, a sister who makes a salad the size of a small child and a brother-in-law who can talk about mountain biking for 12 minutes straight without asking me a single thing I don't want to answer. We brought pie and I didn't rehearse anything on the drive over. It felt like wrong shoes for a second and then it just felt like my life was expanding again and nobody was tugging at the edges to make it fit them. 2 weeks later I got an email with subpoena in the subject line, and I took a deep breath and didn't cry at my desk. It was for a hearing, not a trial, and my lawyer said I would sit in a room with wood paneling and tell the truth into a microphone and then go home and eat pasta like a person. I did exactly that. I said my full name and spelled it and said what I did for a living and then said what happened in sentences that didn't ask for sympathy. The attorney on the other side asked me if I had ever given explicit consent to use my identity and I said no, and my voice didn't shake, even when he asked if I had ever benefited from any of the arrangements, like that word was a doily. I walked out into the cold air and shook because my body had held very still inside while my brain did math. He texted me that night, which he would have known not to do 5 years ago, but sobriety does not install the patch that makes you suddenly have boundaries. I saw your name on the witness list, he wrote. I won't make you the bad guy. It was so old, that phrasing, that my ribs hurt. I wrote back, I told the truth. That's all. He didn't reply. I put my phone face down and read a book that had nothing to do with anything except a woman walking by a river in the 70s and fell asleep with my light on like a kid who forgot how to end the day properly. If this were fiction, the next part would be interested in justice as a satisfying meal. Real life gave me an email from the AG's office with words like diversion and restitution and no contact. He took a deal that keeps him out of prison and inside of a checkbox nightmare with a probation officer who I hope has a voice like gravel. He has to pay me back every penny it cost to unwind the mess that fell on my doorstep. A check showed up last Friday for an amount that made me laugh out loud because of the way zeros look when they are for you and not a bill. I paid my lawyer, bought my mom a plane ticket for the spring because she hasn't seen the ocean in 3 years, and then bought a table that seats 8 even though there are only 2 chairs in my apartment. I'm allowed to plan for space. The other women on that list, they aren't my story to tell, but I reached out anyway through a friend of a friend long chain because I didn't want them to get mail with my name on it and not have the context I wish I'd had. One wrote back that she had wondered for months why PayPal kept sending her emails she deleted like they were spam. One said she wouldn't have believed me 2 years ago and she believes me now and that's as much as she can manage. That felt like a thing that doesn't make anyone clap but matters. Nick sent another photo this week, a chip with a Roman numeral I had to Google because my brain is mush with numbers after all this. A torn corner of a meeting schedule. No text. I typed 3 sentences and erased all of them. I sent back a thumbs up because I am not unkind and then turned my phone off and put the charger in a drawer because sometimes loving yourself looks like performing your own power outage. There's not a bow here, but there's a rhythm. I get up. I make coffee. Evan ruins an omelet and swivels to ask if we should just order bagels like that was the plan all along. I go to work and use my brain in ways that don't require me to lie to myself. On Wednesdays I take a pottery class where I'm comically bad at making anything taller than a mug and the teacher tells me my bowls have character like that's a consolation prize. My ring finger is naked and sometimes I look at it and think about how strange it is that a piece of me that used to feel like a promise now feels like air. I like air. The last weird thing, a padded envelope arrived addressed in neat block letters. No return address. Inside was a Polaroid of me and Joe's wife on that terrible visit years ago, arms around each other on a porch I can still smell, both of us pretending we weren't standing in a silo full of corn that was about to collapse. On the back, in a different hand than either of ours, someone had written, "We made it out." I put it in a drawer, not the one with the phone. A better drawer, the one where I keep passports and a pair of earrings from my grandmother and a stiff airline boarding pass to my favorite city. That drawer is for things that are mine. I don't mind it being full.